Hi everyone, my name is Betsy Bailey. For my lesson, I decided that I wanted to learn a little bit more about speech and language impairments. So that's what I'm going to be discussing today and just kind of covering and teaching all about. So first off, what is a speech and language impairment? A speech and language impairment by IDEA is defined as a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. So it kind of has a lot of aspects that it covers since it is both a speech and a language impairment, and I'm kind of going to be going into what each of these things mean a little further on. So first off, how can a speech and language impairment affect a child? In some of our previous readings, we read a little bit about this, but the thing that I really wanted to touch on is how it affects a student's oral motor functions, specifically the way they articulate sounds. Articulation sounds are produced incorrectly. This is why we hear a student stutter or have lisp. They have difficulty with fluency, so how their speech flows. Sometimes they'll add an extra syllable or they'll say words that are missing syllables, and there will just be a break in their patterns of speech. So it'll either be prolonged, so you'll see them kind of wanting to say something and pausing, or repeating what they're saying because they can't simply get out what they're trying to say next. The third thing it affects is their voice, so there's either an abnormal pitch, resonance, or loudness. The fourth thing is language. So this just kind of covers all of it. It's problems expressing needs, ideas, informations, or understanding what others are trying to say, which kind of creates that break-in pattern for trying to articulate their sentences. Speech and language disorders. I really liked this graph because, I like this picture because it shows you the different parts of your brain that receive that cognitive development. The red is a semantic aphasia, the blue is logopenic aphasia, the green is non-fluent aphasia, and the yellow is apraxia of speech. So some of the common disorders that are created within speech and language impairments are also signs that you can look for when children are growing up. So the first one is childhood apraxia of speech. So this is basically when someone is speaking, your mind sends a message to your brain, and the brain sends a message from your brain to your mouth, and then the muscles between your brain and your mouth allow you to speak and express that message clearly. So what happens with children who have these speech disorders is these messages aren't articulated correctly and they aren't able to say what they're trying to say. But one thing I really found interesting in an article I read is that while they're unable to express what they're trying to say, their mind is really clear. Like they know exactly what they're trying to say, they just can't simply get to the point of saying it. Dysarthria is muscle weakness, which causes slurred or mumbled speech, so their sound is choppy when they're talking. Orofacial myofunctional disorder is when they have trouble saying sounds, so they can't say sun, zoo, ship, chew, jump. And then other common disorders are speech sounds, stuttering, and voice impairment. 3 types of language disorders that are really important to recognize, especially as children are developing between the ages of, 1 or 2 whenever they start speaking up until they're in their early education, is looking for these signs. If they're having receptive language issues, which involves difficulty understanding what others are saying. If they're having expressive language issues, which involves difficulty expressing their thoughts and their ideas. And mixed recessive expressive language issues, which just involves difficulty understanding and using spoken language. Some of the common causes of speech and language impairments, they really can range from a variety of things. A couple of the articles I read talked about how They'll have hearing loss when they're little, or they'll have neurological disorders so their brain won't develop fully. They'll have intellectual disabilities, so sometimes speech and language impairments are paired with other disabilities. It can be drug abuse when they're in their parent's womb. It can be physical impairments when they're born. They can have a cleft lip or a palate. It can just be a vocal abuse or misuse as they're growing up. It can be that they have muscular disorders, which affects the way your muscles function, which affects the way you're able to develop. So these are just kind of some of the causes that are important to acknowledge. Signs of a student with a speech or a language impairment in a classroom setting. I found this video that I really like and want us to kind of watch together just so we can see what other teachers are saying about signs within their own students. Okay, here we go.
It can be really difficult for teachers to pick up children with language impairment in a whole class full of children. And every child with a language impairment has slightly different difficulties and strengths within language. But there are signs to look out for, and it's important that teachers are tuned into these. A teacher may spot some difficulties or behaviours that could indicate a language difficulty. So, for example, a child may have difficulties at break negotiating with their peers or maybe understanding the rules of a game. In the classroom, a teacher may feel that the child is forgetful or perhaps a poor listener because they don't seem to be listening to the instructions or carrying out the instructions that they've been given.
Those children who have trouble getting down to their work might be an indication that the language is a problem for them. There are those children who avoid work, sit there staring into space, not finishing the task, perhaps because the language is too difficult for them. And then there are those children who are always looking around the room, copying what the others are doing to make sure that they are on track, and also copy beautifully, but don't produce the written work on their own that you might expect them to do.
So I really liked this video because when I first watched it, it's like a 15-minute video, and I just cut 2 snippets out that I really liked. But it talks about a couple of different students in middle school and high school, and it just talks about how these teachers were able to, well, this is a teacher and the other one was a speech pathologist, but how they were able to recognize, hey, this student is having a difficult time in the classroom. And I just listed out some of the things that they mentioned. You know, they'll have difficulties negotiating or expressing their feelings with their peers. They'll have difficulties understanding what the assignment is that they need to get done. And basically when this happens, they become withdrawn from the class and they're not willing to participate. And some of it might just be because they don't understand. At least within my own experiences in observations, I've felt that there are a lot of students that are withdrawn, but I've never thought about it this way. Are they withdrawn because they're simply not understanding what the teacher is implying? And some of it might just be, you know, they're not paying attention and they're not focusing, but some of it might be even more important than that, and we need to be aware of if it is an impairment for them or not. The second video that I have, it's just experienced 2 young men. They're about, I think they're both 15, and they're freshmen in high school, and they're expressing the way they feel when they can't understand what the teacher is saying. Oh, sorry, that flipped over. Okay, here it goes.
There were some occasions when I got really angry that I just walk out of the class or something like that. It just came to a point when I just didn't want to do homework because I just felt stupid, and I just looked at the paper, and if I didn't understand question 1, I would just put it back in my bag, just go off to my room.
Sometimes I mix up words because originally I would, instead of say taken, I would say tooken, because most people say took, but so I added the in at the end because I thought it made more sense.
Okay, so I guess one was actually 16 and this young man was 15. But I like what they're saying because they really are so honest in the way they express their feelings. You know, the first student says, I would pull out my homework and I wouldn't even understand the first line of what the teacher was asking me, and I would get so frustrated, I'd put it back in my backpack and I'd go up to my room and I would just be so withdrawn from class. So that's one thing the teacher could notice, whereas this young man, he's saying, well, sometimes I would create my own conjugation of speech because I think that's what made sense. So I think these are things that are really important to look at when we see students who are having challenges with their experience in our classroom. So just 4 major things that I just wanted to make a note of is when students are having difficulties communicating effectively with classmates and teachers, when they're having difficulties understanding or giving oral presentations, when they aren't participating in classroom discussions or don't feel like they're able to obtain normalcy within a group, then these are really, really big indicators that these students in our classrooms need help and we need to step in to help them. 2 of the things that I found in our current education system that allows help for these students is speech language pathologists, which I think are incredible because they provide individual therapy for the children, for the students, and they're able to consult with the teacher about the most effective ways to facilitate their needs, and they work closely with family members to develop goals and techniques that the students need. The second thing is kind of dependent on the level of language and speech impairment that they have. In high circumstances, when they have like the cleft palate, or when they have all of these like motor, muscular difficulties or irregularities in their development, then assistive technology is really great for them because it provides a communication service. So this is really for those like level 3 speech and language development students. As a teacher, as a future English teacher, one of the things that I've been thinking about, just even in my research and in the things that I've prepared for this lesson, is thinking about what we can do to help them in our classroom. Since we are going to be secondary and high school teachers, we won't necessarily be in that early stage where we're able to catch these disorders during early development, which is like when they're in preschool and elementary school. We do have the ability to catch it while they're in junior high and high school, or if we know that they have IEPs with these disabilities, and we can be aware of creating an environment of acceptance and understanding in the classroom, making sure they feel comfortable with the students they're around. We can work with a speech pathologist to create appropriate communication, academic, and social goals for each student. We can provide them with one-on-one instructional sessions if they need the help. We can maintain clear models of instruction for them, because the 2 young men in the previous video, that was the biggest thing for them, right? They felt like one felt like they couldn't understand what the teacher was asking, and the other felt like what they thought was correct. So we need to make sure that our instruction is clear. And most importantly, we need to simplify the language that we're using in class for these students and repeat instruction when necessary. A couple of resources that I'd highly recommend, some of the resources that I use to find my information, is learning about these disorders, is the National Dissemination Center for Children with Disabilities, and the American Speech and Language Hearing Association. So I hope you guys learned a little bit and were able to gain something new out of this, whether it's a greater perspective for these students or just a higher understanding of what we can do as teachers to help them. Thank you.